One of these neighbourhoods was designed over 100 years ago. The other came out in the late 1990s. One packs people into tight urban blocks with trams, corner shops and narrow streets, and the other spreads them across quiet roads, parking bays and stretches of water. Both were built by the Dutch. And today, I'm putting them to test inside City Skylines 2. On one side of the city, an historic Amsterdam School inspired district with dense mixed-use streets and a tight urban grid. On the other, the Vinex suburb, the 90s Dutch answer to modern living. Same city, two contrasting layouts and ideologies. Then, we're going to see just exactly how each one handles traffic, walkability, public transport and population density once the city starts growing. These neighbourhoods were designed around completely different ideas of what a city should feel like, and I want to find out if we have a clear winner. So to get the answers that we're looking for, first we need to build. I'm kicking things off by starting our grid. This is far removed from a typical, say, North American grid that you might be familiar with. The roads should be slightly curved. I'd like some angled intersections. Throughout this and a little bit later on, we're going to be building some enclosed courtyards, and really we're going to have a continuous street wall on pretty much every block. Although I'm going to be using real planning principles and layouts that you find in real cities, I am going to make a few adjustments here. What I've done is I've just cut those roads ever so slightly short. They're going to lead directly into a bit of a connector road. It's only a single lane on each direction, and I think I might have problems, given especially it's going to work kind of like a mini arterial. So a little adjustment there, just to work with the game that little bit better. One problem we can have with these grids is gridlock. Lots of traffic coming through here, and especially using it particularly as a rat run perhaps between two arterial roads. So to preempt that, what I've done is I've gone ahead and created a one-way system. It should keep things moving, plus it gives me the ability to add quite a bit of parking in here as well. Now we're not quite finished like this shot, but at least you can get a feel for how things are going to work. Around these narrow car lanes, a lot of these neighbourhoods are built around the schools, and this one's going to be no different. We seem to have plenty of capacity for schools, which is weird because previously we were really struggling with that. Nonetheless, I'm going to add it into this neighbourhood. An issue I've had in the past is schools taking up really quite a large amount of real estate. Patrick has released a number of school assets, and I'm going to take advantage of them. Now, I need to freeze. I have a problem. These buildings here in the background should not be this tall. They're going to look really out of place and really throw out the balance of this particular neighbourhood. They appear to have grown when they should not, so what I'll need to do is get them deleted and get them rebuilt. To round off the neighbourhood and give it a little bit more historic character, I've added in a church, and I'm also going to add in this little mosque. These buildings are going to act as little mini projects within the grid. It will visually break things up a little bit for us, and it will make things look that little bit more interesting. When these neighbourhoods were built, people were getting to work on foot and on bike, so I do want to give a few extra options here and there where I can. Now it may be a little bit difficult to see, but what I'm doing here is I'm dictating where the zoning is going with the vanilla zoning tool. I'm going to use a bit of a hybrid technique here. I'm going to use zoning, and then I'm going to plop some buildings back into place, but I'm also going to use zoning to actually fill some gaps as well. So as you can see, this is all filling in pretty nicely, but I'm not going to have proper blocks out of this. It will not look good until we take a little bit further action, and I'm going to show you just exactly how I go about doing that. So as you can see here, when we zoom out a little bit, quite a lot of the work is done for me already. Pretty low effort there, and it's a pretty quick result. So now if we take our focus down to the bottom left here, we can see that we've got really strong demand for commercial, and I want to try and balance that out when I can. I am essentially overzoning here with the medium density, but in fairness, the reason why I'm doing it is that this neighbourhood would look weird with anything else in it, quite frankly, given that what we have in its surrounding neighbourhoods. And in addition to that, it's probably going to be the last of the medium density that this city is going to see in a while. So what I've decided to do here is to use the blocks by StarQ. I am only going to be using high density commercial ones, and what I'd like to do is to give our citizens here in this particular part of the neighbourhood local shopping, commercial opportunities, and I'm hoping that will save on the traffic, keep everything nice and compact, and really stick to the principles of really what this type of development was based on. Taking a minute to check our demand, we can have a look at our medium density buildings, and what I'm looking for here is the empty properties. Now although I'm over zoning, I was expecting significantly more, and you're going to see that that number just keeps falling as well. So everything's working pretty well. I believe that extra commercial that we've added is really helping balance out that population demand. One little trick that I'm going to use to try and boost desirability for these blocks is to actually incorporate parks and attractions directly into it. These blocks quite often have interior courtyards, and I'm really going to lean into that. I'm going to add a whole load of functional parks directly into our blocks. This will really boost the attractiveness scores of this particular neighbourhood, and it will make it much more attractive for people to move in. And of course, it does look a little bit random and a little bit weird if we don't take the time to just make it look that little bit better. So all we need to do is just to add some real basic vegetation and really just hide the roads. I mentioned earlier that I really wanted to make a bit of a feature of some of these public buildings, and one that I've really wanted to build for quite some time is the Chinese Mandarin Church in Amsterdam. Now obviously the architecture doesn't quite match what we have in game, but I wanted the overall layout and I wanted to encompass it directly into a block. I think it fits in quite nicely with what we've done with the parks before. It's all very accessible and it really adds to the aesthetic of this neighbourhood. The next mini project, so to speak, that I'm going to be working on here is bringing the school into the neighbourhood and really making it part of the development. So some of the basics that we're going to do is we're going to sort out the surface work on this, we're going to add a perimeter fence, we're then going to add some vegetation. Again, nothing too wild, and I want to keep the vegetation just in line with what we've done previously. Now I mentioned earlier that these schools are a really great addition, nice and generic, much like the office pack by the same creator, and what it does is it really just gives us a bit of a base that we can go ahead and detail ourselves and give the assets a real individual feel. So let's just get the last of this prop work done. This is how the school is essentially going to sit at the end of the video. There is a little bit of extra surface work here, and you might see that there's a couple of additions in terms of the transport options, but really happy with this. Lovely addition, really nice scale to it as well. If you're wondering what additional surface work was added, this is the French pack by Algendo. We use this throughout the city and it's a really nice surface. At this point it's looking really plain, but what that's going to do is it's really going to give us a bit of a meeting point, or almost like mini plazas, so to speak, within the neighbourhood, and it's going to give us some opportunities to add a little bit more social cohesion and a bit of leisure. And just taking a quick step back, we can see things are coming together really quickly now. The next mini project to tackle is the block that is going to encompass our mosque. Now it's a little bit of an unusual one that we really can only have development on really three sides of it. The other side is going to be part of the path network and also the tram network that you can see in play already. Much like the courtyard functionality that we built earlier on, we're going to be using the functional parks here, get all the benefits, get everybody in and happy and using the attractions, and then what we'll do is we'll use a bit of a mix of surfaces and decals and we'll try and give it that realistic look. But I think that's a really nice way to tackle what would be an awkward plot in this part of the city. At the last minute, I decided to extend our historic grid. The reason for this is that I was planning on doing a bit of a park here. This was suggested by a viewer, and the scale of the park was just off. It was just going to look too big and it was going to look a bit odd. You will notice that I've put in bike lanes. Unfortunately, the bike lanes are not on the same direction as the road traffic, so I guess that's a bit of a bug. I'll get that reported. Maybe we'll get that fixed. But we'll not let that stop us. I'm still going to crack on and create that bike network directly through. These streets should have pedestrian and bike as a priority, and that's something that I really want to focus on as we bring this section to an end. Now of course I want to try and find out which is going to be a winner, and part of that is really desirability, and I do want to make this a desirable neighbourhood. So on that end, what I'm going to be doing is focusing a little bit on the detailing, and I mentioned earlier that we're going to have almost little mini plazas at the street corners. So I do want to focus on them, sort of fill the gap so to speak, but really make it look attractive. And by doing that, what we're going to be doing is making it feel like a place that you really want to live. The bikes, of course, we mentioned earlier on, we're going to have parking facilities for those, and plenty of them if you don't mind. As we now have that connector road to the north really put in place and encompassed by development on all sides, what I'm going to do is just spend a bit of time and really just do the basic detailing that I want. This of course holds one of our tram networks, and this will be a main route through the city. It will be interesting to see just exactly how busy this gets as more people move in. But of course the infrastructure is there already and everything should work straight out of the wrapper. So now we can take a brief cinematic shot of some of the surface work that we've done here, and what a difference it makes to work on that street level. We are now on our final mini project of this gridded neighbourhood, and what we're doing here is we're going to be adding the park. So you can see from the scale of it that it's actually pretty large, and what I wanted to do is to bring that water down a little bit and just add a little bit of depth. Now I did bring it down a little bit too much, perhaps that was going to be a bit dangerous, so let's bring it back up a little bit and it should look that little bit more realistic. Again, same old tricks that we're going to be using. We're going to be adding a park and then we're going to be building things around it. I do want to make sure that it is all very accessible, so we'll use some of the additional path networks and we'll just extend that network. Hopefully it should give a nice little shortcut and a pleasant shortcut for people to get to the offices and the university on the left hand side directly from their housing on the right hand side. This will be taking up quite a lot of real estate, and actually it's going to form quite an important transition in the city from part of a modern development over on the left again back to our historic on the right. So I do want to spend a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra care on the surface work there. I'm going to do something that I don't usually do, and that's actually surface up the paths. It's a little bit tedious, but it's a small area and I think it'll have quite a big impact. Obviously the usual vegetation that we're going to be using, and again I'll skip some of this forward so you guys can just get straight to the result. Now it's the turn to swing across the water and head out towards the suburbs. Now it's the turn of our Vinex neighbourhood, and what I want to do is to give you guys a bit of an explanation as to exactly what that is. So these are large Dutch suburban developments built mainly from the mid-90s through to the 2000s. Now the name comes from the Dutch government planning policy. I'll pop it up on the screen. At this point in history, the Netherlands needed a large amount of housing, and quickly, but the government wanted to try and avoid uncontrolled sprawl like you find in American suburbs. So instead of building isolated commuter towns far away from the cities, they expanded existing cities with master planned suburbs connected to public transport and cycling infrastructure. The good news with this build is that I've done a lot of that infrastructure already. The arterial road layout is done, the public transport networks are already sorted out, and the vast majority of the pedestrian and bike network is already in place. When we put that infrastructure in place, we had a few comments talking about these particular roads. These aren't highways, these are supposed to be, although they are highway roads in the game, they are supposed to be these local sort of connector roads or arterial roads, and what I've decided to do is to really just downgrade an awful lot of them and make sure that that is a little bit more clear. Now we did have a few comments showing me, or give me ideas in terms of how to make it look a little bit less like highways, but it's just too much work, to be honest with you. So what I've done is I've decided to land on this, just do the downgrades, get some of these connector roads ready for expansion, and then we should be good to go. So let's contrast that empty road network to the finished article, and you can see we've got an awful lot of work to do. Now as I crack on expanding the development here today, what I'm going to do is to give you guys a little bit more context on the Vinex neighbourhood and sort of describe some of the key characteristics that you might find. So in terms of the homes, they tend to be more sort of medium density suburbs. So think of terraced housing instead of detached homes, narrow plots, compact street layouts, and houses packed closely together. But in addition to that, you'll also find apartments, larger apartments near transit nodes. That said, I am going to take the opportunity to add the odd office development here and there and make sure that we have jobs nice and close by where the people are. In terms of the road layouts, you quite often see cul-de-sacs and loops, and the idea is to really try and limit the rat runs that you might find in other cities, like maybe perhaps what we saw in the grid earlier on. A lot of these neighbourhoods do use water quite heavily, so your artificial canals and retention ponds. I've used it here quite a bit near the station, and it does look pretty good, and that's part of it, partly aesthetic and partly flood management. Here's a quick example of what we're looking to do here. Really, there's only going to be one or two ways onto our main arterial roads, and that is going to prevent the rat runs. You can't get from one side to the other without actually crossing. In terms of the tools that I'm going to use, I'm going to do things a little bit differently than what you saw me do earlier on the grid, and I'm going to be using copy and paste quite a lot for each individual parcel of land that I'm going to be building on. Given the tight gaps between a lot of the roads, the zoning became a little bit more difficult, and it was simply easier just to copy and paste. Now I'm not just going to do individual blocks, I'm actually going to be doing something a little bit more ambitious. But one thing that did take a little bit of time was just going around individually the ends of blocks, making sure that we've got the right asset and creating the correct look for this part of the build. Here gives you a little bit of a blueprint for what we're going to be doing. We do have 6 individual sections, which is a lot of work. It's a significant amount of land that we're building on today, but as I said earlier on, I'm going to be ambitious, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and copy an entire neighbourhood and paste it across the road. Now, I might not necessarily recommend you do this. This seems a little bit risky and it's a little bit crashy, and you've got a pretty good chance of crashing the game if you're going to be doing this regularly. So don't recommend it. If you are going to do it, make sure that you have your game saves backed up and you are willing to accept a crash. However, that said, it worked okay for me. Happy days. It did have to spend a little bit of time fixing the road. It was a bit of a mess after I was done there, but that saved me quite a bit of time, and what I can do now is really build around it and make it look unique. It will not look like a copy and paste, even though that is essentially what 70% of this particular subsection is going to be made of. So one thing that you may have picked up when I showed you the real life suburb that this is based on, there's actually quite a good variation in terms of colours. So we've got reds, greens, greys, and a fairly diverse range of architecture. Now, I'm not going to go too mad really in terms of the architectural styles. What I'm mainly going to be using is the Dutch medium row homes, but what I will be doing, of course, is adding a little bit of additional density. These are office assets, but I think they are going to work really nicely as fake residential ones. And as a little bit of a bonus, I didn't even have to recolour them. To bulk it out, again, we're just going to use copy and paste, and we're going to have a few select blocks here and there and try and recreate what I've seen online on Google Maps. Now, of course, there's still a lot of tidying up work to be done, but in terms of the overall layout, you can see that it does look quite different than the one that we created earlier across the road. So I'm going to very quickly just get those missing streets put in place, and then what I'm going to do is try another copy pasta. Now for this one, I want to put another school at the heart of the development. I want it to be nice and central, and I want it to be nice and accessible by pedestrian routes and by cycle routes. So although we do have assets repeating, and in fact this type of development does have planned uniformity, it's actually one of the common complaints. By using different colours and using different assets in public service buildings, we're able to create subsections or subdevelopments within the neighbourhood, and everything will look that bit different. As we head out towards the water, I thought I'd change things up a little bit. I didn't want to do another copy and paste, but rather what I'd done is create a little bit of a layout that I found on Google Maps by using smaller subsections and really just joining them together. I think it works pretty well, and it's a little bit of a contrast to what we have across the road. But now you can get a feel for really the scale of what I'm trying to achieve here. So I think what's going to be interesting at the end of the video, once we get all of this recolouring stuff done and all of the detailing, is really just comparing what we have here in terms of density, the cycling, the traffic, the design, and perhaps the repetitiousness of each of the developments, and really just comparing the two. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rate them based on my own criteria, and what I'd be interested to hear is what you guys think as well, and really which area you would prefer to live in. Now, although it's not very common, but one thing that you might find at the edge of a Dutch Vinex pattern is a business park or logistics zone. Given the close proximity to the highway and the very easy access it will have to it via this interchange, I decided to incorporate just a modest one here at the edge of the development. This will serve a couple of purposes. One, it'll just break up the visual repetition of the residential development that's gone before, and two, it's going to give us some well-needed jobs that we have. And of course, we've got plenty of demand for commercial, industrial and office, and I'd really like to incorporate just as much as that commercial really as I can. So again, I'm going to use the blocks, and although we have warehousing there, it will be commercial. So for me, I believe that that is all of the main layout done and the majority of the buildings that need to be put in place. Now that's going to lead us up to the point where we're going to add some important city services. Remember, the design of these areas are very much supposed to be family friendly, and keeping that in mind, then obviously we're going to have to make sure that there's going to be enough leisure opportunities for all ages. So I'm going to use a liberal sprinkling of parks and we'll get them dotted around the place. The other thing, remember, of course, is it's really supposed to have great transport networks. Now, I fully accept that this might not necessarily be a particularly safe design for a transit stop, but there are natural crossing points, and it's probably our best spot, with the exception, of course, of the main multinodal transport hub that we already have put in place. So for me, it's that time of the video where we are really going to bring this neighbourhood alive. What I want to do is to introduce some more water features into the development. I want to have these little mini canals and drainage ditches and whatnot. I want to add a little bit of road colouring just for a bit of interest really in some of the individual sub-neighbourhoods. The sports centre or sports facilities I want to add, and really just again add a bit of colour to where we have them dotted around the place. We have road markings to be done on the main arterial network and some of the interchanges, and talking about interchanges, I want to really add a bit of colour around there and make sure that it's sitting properly into the environment. So by that, what I mean is adding some dirt. We're going to have a good selection of decals and surfaces to decorate the place and really make it look pretty. And once we get to the end of that, we also need to add some of the detail around that modest industrial area that I've added as well. So we've got a bit of warehouse in there, and obviously we've got a factory too, and we want to make sure that it's looking like it's actually going to be in use. So let's get that wrapped up, and then we can have a bit of a discussion in terms of which area wins. I'm now going to take a little bit of a break from the building, and I'm going to address some of the stuff that you guys have left in the previous comments. So a few weeks ago I was having a bit of a moan about some of the yellow taxis, and apparently you can recolour them per service building. So you just set one colour and all of the vehicles that spawn from that building will have that colour scheme. Now, based on the amount of comments that we had, I seem to have been the last person in the world to know that. So thank you very much, guys. Here's how you do it. You can see service vehicles. You simply just click that button and then set the scheme and you're good to go. So obviously that's the police cars done for that particular station. Here's the taxis. Service vehicles, you can see that they're black, and everything spawning from that particular taxi rank or that particular taxi station should now be black. Now, of course, as you'd imagine, we do have quite a number of police stations, so you have to go in there and grab the buildings individually, scroll down, find one of the police cars, click on it, make sure service vehicles is clicked, and then all you need to do is just paste what you've copied earlier on, and you should be good to go for that particular building. As far as I can tell, you can do that for all buildings, but you do need one of the vehicles to actually be spawned. You can see here with the hospital, we don't actually have any cars or any ambulances in use, so can't change this just yet. But the main thing is happy days, no silly, bright yellow taxis in the city anymore. The next thing I'm going to do is address this shambles of an interchange. You can see that it's only partially built. I don't know what on earth I was thinking, and I basically just missed out 2 ramps. I think what my train of thought was I was going to do something fancy and sort of reroute traffic around off to the sides rather than having the normal ramps that you would expect, but somewhere along the lines I just got distracted and ended up building something else and completely forgot to come back to do it. In my defense, I was trying to get 4 videos together while I was off on holiday and make sure that you guys had some content while I was away. So that's my excuse and I am going to stick to it. So to try and resolve this problem, what I did on the right hand side is I just simply used the conversion tool and converted the road into an asymmetric to bring it into the main arterial. I simply did not have the space to do a separate ramp, and I think it's a pretty good solution. And it means that I don't have to demolish our sports park over there on the right hand side. That would have ended up being quite a lot of work because it's a pretty nicely detailed little area. So we're going to go for an asymmetric solution on the right hand side, and on the left hand side where we have the space, I'm just going to do a separate ramp and we'll give it that Dutch feel. So nice bit of landscape in there. We're going to make sure that the surfaces are all looking pretty good, and it should look significantly better, and it will definitely work significantly better than what was there before. Now that we've completed the transformation of two major chunks of land in our city, the question remains, which one is the winner? Are you likely to go for the quiet comfort, practicality and space of the Vinex neighbourhood, or would you prefer the urban energy, character and walkability of our urban grid? What I'm going to attempt to do now is to try and give some numbers to that. So I'd like to propose that we look at 5 individual measurements. So we're going to look at traffic, walkability, public transport, population density and entertainment. For each of the 5 criteria, I'm going to rate each one a score out of 10. Once we combine all the scores together, whoever has the highest points is going to be crowned the winner. I'm going to look at the grid first. Now, in terms of traffic, we might have some problems. There's a certain amount of cross-city traffic, and we also need access to that arterial road that goes underneath the interchange. So I'm going to rate that a 6 out of 10. For walkability, I think it's going to score pretty highly. In that part of the city, there is a lot going on, and it's all within a short walking distance. So I'm going to rate that really highly, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. For public transport, I'm also going to give that a 9 out of 10. It's surrounded by multiple tram routes, and the central station isn't that far away either. Again, all very walkable. In terms of population density, I'm going to rate that an 8 out of 10. All of the buildings are between 4 and 6 stories, and although the blocks are all fairly tight together, there is still a reasonable amount of space to breathe. And the final score is to do with entertainment and culture. And again, given that its location, really in the heart of the city, it has to be a high score. Right beside the museum district, we've got plenty going on at the commercial centre, and again, it's going to be another 9 out of 10. That's going to give us a pretty high score of 41 out of 50. Switching our attention now to the outskirts, to our Vinex neighbourhood, again we're going to look at those same criteria. Again, first up is going to be traffic, and here we have got fantastic access to the overall road network and obviously very easy access to the highway. High score for this one, I'm going to give it a 9. In terms of walkability, it should rate reasonably highly. There are options to get around, but given the overall size of the entire neighbourhood, if we take it in its entirety, it might be a little bit more difficult. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10. In terms of the public transport network, we have subway, we've got major trains running through here, and of course we have our trams. Now the only thing, given the overall size of the development, it might not necessarily be the easiest to get to that particular stop. However, given that we've got plenty of options, I'm still going to rate it pretty highly, and we're going to give that an 8 out of 10. In terms of population density and really just how efficient the land has been used, I'm going to give that a 7 out of 10, not a bad score. And although these buildings are relatively compact and they are small lots, everything does take up quite a bit of land, and especially the transport networks, and that's not just the roads. In terms of the entertainment or cultural value, then it's going to be a pretty low score. I'm going to give it just 5 points. It simply can't compete with the entertainment and the attractions that you'll find in the centre of a city, and especially not an historic city like this. So with all the scores in, we have a clear winner. The historic grid is going to be crowned our champion today. A total of 41 points against the Vinex 36 points. Now what do you guys make of that? Do you agree with that assessment, or have you got other opinions? Make sure you let me know in the comments. The last point that I want to leave with you guys is that if you've enjoyed this deep dive into planning and building neighbourhoods, you might wonder what goes into planning the transport and infrastructure for such developments. If so, check out this video where I kick off an urbanist suburb designed around walkability, cycling and mixed-use development. Also, there's trams and trains in this one, and they feature heavily, so go check it out.